Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, as COVID lingers on, one thing that's becoming really apparent is that this is creating some strain on our romantic relationships. All relationships, but today we'll focus on the romantic ones. This is actually reaching pretty concerning proportions. There are a lot of news articles coming out, including the New York Times, reporting that domestic violence, intimate partner violence, are increasing. There are many more police calls for domestic violence. And so we kind of know that this quarantine period is putting a lot of strain on relationships and limiting social support, which is a predictive factor for intimate partner violence.
Yeah, we just know that the COVID times, like the quarantining situations have been really stressful for all kinds of family situations and roommate situations, but especially romantic partnerships. Just because the situation is so different now, right? People have to stay in the same place and they don't have access to their friends, social support, people to take care of their kids, their friends they could just, hang out with and spend some quality time with. So it's a very different scenario, very different environment for a lot of romantic relationships.
Yeah, people are finding themselves in a situation where their normal mode of operating is no longer available to them. So if they're kind of used to being in relationships with a certain amount of space, that's no longer even an option. People being perhaps forced to live together earlier than they otherwise would, or being kept apart for much longer. So any of you in romantic relationships, I'm sure you've seen some sort of change, and it may have been positive. And that's actually part of what we want to talk about today is what are the kind of factors in maybe the situation or in who we are and the way that we interact with other people or relate to other people that make this period harder on our relationships or even potentially better. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about are attachment styles. Kibby, you want to give us a rundown on what the major attachment styles are and what that means?
The theory of attachment, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this, but what it really means is it's based on the theory that especially human beings, a lot of animals, but especially human beings, in order to survive, we have to stay close to a caregiver. So when we're babies, we start to cry or we start to show signs of stress when we're away from like a mother figure or another caregiver figure. That's why like when babies cry when they're really far apart from their moms. So the idea is that babies start to learn how to express distress in order to bring closeness again, to get the mom to come and soothe them and to create that closeness again with that caregiver as a whole mechanism of survival. That's the way that babies are, stay alive. And they tested this out in research in really cute studies. Mary Ainsworth developed this study where she actually had kids come in with their mothers into the lab, and they did this strange situation task where the mom had to leave the kid in kind of this strange room, and maybe an experimenter come in and say hi to the kid. So it's like exposing this young toddler to a really new situation without their moms or their caregivers. And then the mom would come back into the room, and then they would kind of see how kids would react to their moms. And they noticed that kids who are in a secure, good, healthy relationship with their caregivers, I'll say moms because I think that was mostly moms, would be a little bit distressed when the mom was away and then really enjoy when the mom was back, and then after a while would calm down when they saw the mother was there.
And they would have a level of independence then, right? They'd go and play.
They would go to explore. They would, they would show signs of distress, but as soon as they got that closeness with the mom, they'd kind of chill out a little bit and calm down. But there were some kids who were on two different categories. One is the anxious attachment. They called these kids anxious attachment when they would get really, really upset when there was separation. They reacted with a lot of distress, a lot of crying, a lot of being upset. And when the mom came back in, they would cling to the mom and really, really want that closeness. So anxious attachment is now a term for people who really, really want that closeness and get really distressed when there's separation. And then they see these other kids who are avoidant attachment or avoidantly attached, who didn't seem that bothered when the mom was out of the room. They kind of played with their toys, just were happy by themselves. And when the mom was back in the room, they actively avoided the mom. They would kind of back away and kind of avoid the moms coming to greet them, with the understanding that the kid still got it distressed, like it still was a weird situation, but didn't seek the mom out to help them calm down. So that, it was kind of like formed the basis of understanding how people start to relate to others, like these attachment figures, these people who are supposed to be there in our lives to, help us feel secure, help us feel safe, and how some people go towards that and cling to that figure, and some actually back away. And they've applied that recently. The researchers have applied that recently to romantic relationships. Hazan and Schaefer have been doing a lot of research on how different people may be avoidantly attached, securely attached, or anxiously attached, and how that will determine how they behave towards their romantic partners. So the kind of person who doesn't call for a while, is cool by themselves, almost avoids like contact with, needs a lot of space, right? Breaks up with people, maybe the dumper a lot. That tends to be avoidantly attached, whereas anxious attached people tend to be the ones who are like, I got to call them all the time, like a little more clingy, which is kind of a negative way to say it, but like really, really values that closeness and gets really upset when there's separation. And then there's securely attached, somewhere in the middle, where people like the closeness, but also can balance with independence. And this is more of like a spectrum, right? It's not like people are only one way or another. You could kind of go back and forth between these types. Could be different people that you're avoidantly attached or anxiously attached. So that's kind of like where the state of like how we understand attachment relationships.
One important point you're bringing up is that it's not always as black and white as I am an anxiously attached person, I'm an avoidantly attached person. This can shift a bit, and there's also the simple fact that if you are in a relationship that makes you feel insecure, that's going to make you anxious. That's going to make anybody anxious. So it's very possible, that depending on the relationship that you're in or that you have been in, these attachment styles have kind of shifted. I do think that there's kind of an overarching pattern that some of us see, where there's this more like persistent kind of style that keeps coming back, maybe when certain conditions are met, like once we kind of get into the committed stage, once we're with someone where it's a more neutral ground, it's not so confusing, like in the beginning of relationships, that can kind of create more of an upheaval in our emotions and may not be as representative of who we are normally. And so just to flesh these out a little bit more, if you've got an anxious attachment style, you might be somebody who needs a whole lot of reassurance from your partner that they love you, that you can trust them, that you're the only person in their romantic sphere. You might be checking in with them a lot. You might have some trust issues. They might experience you as kind of clingy, or they might not be so sure, why you're checking in so much, why you don't seem to trust them. And this can kind of cause some friction in those areas. If you're an avoidantly attached person, this can kind of show up in multiple ways. One can be that you're incredibly self-reliant, and so you have difficulty depending on people for things, depending on partners. It can mean that you have these sort of detachment processes that you go through, where when intimacy becomes like kind of really up close and scary to you, you start pushing away. It might be hard for you to say I love you. It might be hard for you to have physical closeness. You might always be thinking, is this really the one? During fights, you might think things like, oh, I knew it. This was not the right person for me. I'm better off alone. I'm more comfortable alone. So there's kind of just this you keep reverting to everything's easier alone. Everything's easier when I don't have somebody really close. And the anxious person is reverting to, I don't know if I can trust that they're always going to be there for me. I want them closer, but I don't know if that's what they want. And then the secure person is more, they're both able to give space and independence and able to experience closeness and intimacy. And we're all kind of on the spectrum of this. A lot of times we think about people who are avoidant as fuckboys or people to avoid, but sometimes it might just mean, you're sort of avoidantly secure. You have trouble doing things. You have trouble with codependence. You're just maybe a bit more independent. You need a bit more space. Sometimes if you're anxious, maybe you've had past partners that made you feel that way. And so this is a pattern that needs to get unstuck, and you need practice with that. So there's definitely a gradient. There's also people who experience both avoidant and anxious tendencies, and that's a longer story.
And I also want to point out too that, it might seem like being anxiously attached or avoidantly attached is like bad or wrong or shameful. And I would say that if you think about all of the things that we talk about in psychology, it's like we do things for a reason. There is a reason why we behave the way we do. We have the patterns that we do. A lot of the time is because it helped us survive and cope with previous situations. So, I don't know the literature on this, but I would think that a lot of people who have anxious attachment or avoidant attachment, they might have been through like kind of abusive or hard or challenging environments growing up, right? If there was an abusive parent, then avoiding them was actually the thing that reduces distress and like help that kid keep safe. And so if they keep doing that in their current relationship, doesn't mean that they're bad people. It's just that's the way they learn how to cope and calm down in the context of a relationship, of close relationship. So that's what
it also doesn't mean that you're condemned to this forever. If you're an anxiously attached person and maybe you've had bad relationships in the past that have taught you to feel this way, then maybe you meet a partner who makes you feel really secure, and maybe it's a bit rocky in the beginning as you're figuring things out, but the more secure you begin to feel, the less you kind of need these defensive reactions or this anxiety. And the same with an avoidantly attached person. But the last thing I'll say is that even though this research was about, the mother caretaker, this doesn't mean that your mother did a bad job or that there's that this was a failing in any part of your primary caretaker. There are a lot of things that could go into this. But that was just the way that we relate to our new family, our chosen families, or our husband or wife or spouse. It can reflect kind of the way we felt in our family of origin. Okay, so I reached out to my Instagram followers, as always, and Kibbe and I had this hypothesis that not only is it not bad to have one of these attachment styles, but maybe it's actually adaptive in certain contexts. And quarantine might be a really interesting one. And we're thinking specifically about anxious attachment styles here, because people with anxious attachment styles they really want their partners close, and they feel really good when their partner is available to them. And that is what quarantine is. So we've got this hypothesis going. We've got data running on it. We're about to analyze. And I did like a little unofficial study on my Instagram, polling people, asking if they are quarantining together or apart, if this attachment style describes them and how they're doing. And we found, matched our hypothesis, was that anxious attachment styled people quarantining with their partner are loving it. Doesn't go for everyone, of course, but I got repeated responses saying they love the closeness. They love being able to have lunch or coffee with their partner every day. This is bringing them a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings and good times. We did the same thing for avoidant people, and it was not quite so clear of a story. But we'll start off by talking about anxious attachment and how that might be affected during COVID, and sort of some strategies for moving through that kind of style. And then we'll focus on avoidant. And then I think we'll give some kind of skills and tips for how to manage relationship conflict in general. So I had a friend who reached out to me about her own relationship, and she describes herself as having an anxious attachment style. And she describes her partner, this is a relatively new partner, as having a more of an avoidant style, but it wasn't super clear to me whether maybe that was a reaction to their dynamic or if this is a pattern for him. But she's got this anxious attachment style. So they are not quarantining together, but their first few months together, it was just them. She got him to herself on his time off. She never wondered where he was or who he was with. But then during the summer, his friends became more available to spend time with him while all of her friends left the city where she was living. So she started getting, as she says, FOMO when he did anything with his friends without her. At one point, one of his female friends got really drunk and was aggressively flirting with him and being touchy in front of her. This made her very angry. She stayed angry for days, even when he apologized for allowing that dynamic. This led to her becoming untrusting and wanting to know where he was and who he was with at all times. And so, of course, you can see how this dynamic is going to push him further and further away. And as he's pushed further away, she's getting less of what she wants and her anxiety is rising. So whether he has an avoidant attachment style or whether he's just reacting to the dynamic, what he's looking for is not to be checked in with all the time. He's looking for independence. He wants to see his friends. This is a new relationship, and her anxiety is making him go further away, which makes her anxiety worse. So then, of course, he starts feeling as though there's nothing he can do to resolve her anxiety. He cannot get her to trust him. He just can't see any ways out of this, so he broke it off. Eventually, what happened was they came together, they had a few weeks of separation, realized that made them miserable. They missed each other, so they came together and talked. So she says they really just tackled their issues through talking. They were both willing to talk, listen, and attempt to meet each other's needs. And what he recognized was that he has a role to play in establishing trust and reassuring her that she can trust him. She, in turn, recognized that she has a role to play in giving him space and trusting him to do things without her. And this is something I'll get into in a second, but she had to realize that he needs other people, that she can't fulfill all of her needs herself. And where this really came in is that there was a racial dynamic at play. She's a white woman. He's a black man. And given the George Floyd protests, what happened with Amy Cooper, he at this point is really needing friends of other races. He can't just fully rely on his white girlfriend to kind of meet this need and help him through this own, very legitimate fear and anxiety. And so she said that kind of her never being able to fully understand his experience made her insecure. And this insecurity is not something he necessarily wanted to deal with or didn't know how to deal with. And why this is a really interesting dynamic for someone with anxious attachment is that there can be this sense that you feel like you need to be all things for one person. And if they need things from others that you can't provide, then that's like a fissure in your ability to trust them. And it's hard to understand. But this is a very clear example of she full stop cannot meet all of his needs in this arena. He needs a sense of independence. He needs other connections. And she kind of had to come to terms with that. And this is going to crop up in all sorts of ways. I mean, whether or not there's any kind of racial dynamic, everybody in a relationship is going to have independent needs. They're going to have needs for other friends who are very different from their partner. They're going to need activities that their partner cannot partake in. And this can be really, really difficult for the anxious partner to accept. Kibby, do you have any?
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about how the core piece about anxious people who are anxiously attached is that they're afraid of how fragile their relationship feels, or at least like the idea that people are going to stick around and be there as a source of comfort and security. They have trouble believing that. And so they think sometimes, it has to be perfect. It has to fulfill the standard. I have to fulfill standards. Like putting a lot of pressure and expectations on what do I need to do and what does this have to look like for me to feel like I can relax and trust that it'll be there at the end of the day. Which tends to then people might like act on that anxiety, right? They might want more reassurance. They may change the way they are and how they behave to try to fit the standard, so that it just puts a lot of pressure on it because it feels so fragile. Mm-hmm. And I guess what your friend did was just kind of lead into an acceptance of, okay, like I can't fulfill this part for him. He needs to be able to explore and find that support somewhere else. And I can't provide that, but that doesn't mean that a relationship is over or that he'll leave. Yeah.
So this is kind of manifesting in quarantine a bit, because while, people with an anxious attachment style might be really happy to have their partner there with them really close, their partner might be struggling with this a bit more. And that can be pretty hurtful to the anxious partner. You're loving this. You're thinking, gosh, I finally have all this closeness that I've been craving. Why does my partner feel differently? And that can feel really rejecting. But it might be as simple as your partner has a slightly different attachment style. They have different needs. And while they love being with you maybe a majority of the time, or, to whatever extent that they are typically kind of comfortable, they might just have different needs for independence and space. And so kind of negotiating these different needs for space and closeness is going to be really important.
It's really interesting to think about these, like how people are anxiously or avoidantly attached and how they're responding to COVID, because it's really like either of those insecure attachment styles will kind of cope with relationships in specific ways, right? Like escaping or clinging or whatever. And this really constrained us to like, we're all going to be in this same house together, or we're going to be apart. And for me, over the course of my life, I kind of talked about it last episode, but going through a really hard experiences in my childhood with my mom's alcoholism. And I really learned a lot how to be self-sufficient. That's how I learned how to be safe, is to almost like kind of withdraw into myself, like, okay, I'll do it myself. I can only trust myself. I'll handle it. So that's my default when I'm super stressed, is like, I got to do it myself. So over the years, I've been more avoidantly attached, I would say. I mean, I've had a lot of great relationships with great people, and I really value my experiences with them. But when times are really stressful, I will default on I don't need them. I could do it myself, and maybe break off the relationship or not tell them when I actually need something and not ask for help. Mm-hmm. I know that's like something that I've been working on really hard throughout my life. And so I would say I still have those tendencies. The way actually like I was able to like, feel comfortable with marriage is that my husband is like so loving and so available. Like I don't want to say he's anxiously attached, but he really values closeness. And so times where I back away, he's just like there with open arms for when I come back. And I think like even throughout our relationship, I just have known that I've always needed space. Like when I get really stressed and when, times are really tough, like I just need to be by myself. And I've had to have a lot of communication, like a lot of talks with my husband about that. It doesn't mean I don't love him or that I'm, breaking off the relationship, but I just really need that sometimes. And we've been very clear about that, which I really appreciate. Otherwise I'd feel smothered, right? I'd find a reason why I need to get out of it and why I don't like him, blah, blah, blah. I think we got through it by, I just admitted this to myself. Like I admitted that I wasn't like angry with him. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but I just need that space, and I didn't have that coping strategy. And I think we had to sit down and talk about it at some point, because he could tell that I was pulling away. I could tell that I was getting more snappy with him. And at least like talking about it a little bit more took the pressure off. I felt even if we didn't get that space because we still had to wait until, we could travel safely, it still was like, I didn't feel like I had to like suffer by myself. I felt like at least he knew what I was doing and what I was feeling.
Yeah, there's a huge release when you can just say the thing you're afraid to say and then see that, oh, it was accepted, and he didn't take it as I don't love him or as that's an unacceptable
that was the key.
need.
I think it's sometimes with avoidant attachment people, if all the things that we do to get space for ourselves, escape, go somewhere else, hang out with someone else, it might seem to the other person like we don't care. Mm-hmm. And it I think really could be the case, but it's sometimes that's just what we need to be in a relationship, is to like have that space to ourselves. And so I think it was important to balance both, like, hey, I need space and I still love you.
Yeah. I feel like I'm the other side of avoidant. I don't think I have any problems being reliant on other people. In fact, I'm over-reliant on other people. But I kind of suffer from literally the commitment issue of it all. And it caused a lot of problems with my boyfriend, who has been avoidant in previous relationships, is generally secure, but became anxious for a time with me because I made him feel insecure all the time. And we would get into this pattern where things would be great for a few days. He'd be kind of reconvinced that I loved him. And then I would sort of retreat into myself, and these behaviors that I felt were like totally normal, like not saying hello in the morning, but just sort of going about my day for hours and hours, or just sort of being generally disconnected, except when I wanted to, and then kind of coming up and like petting him or being sweet or whatever. He would then pull away, and it created this dynamic where then I can tell that he's distant. I knew that I was doing something wrong, but I didn't really want to be blamed for doing anything wrong because I was dealing with all this anxiety in my own head. I'm in a position now where I'm very uncomfortable, which is commitment. I want to be committed, but it's like infant Jacqueline doesn't want to be committed ever, ever, ever. So I'm kind of existing with this anxiety, trying not to let it show. And then he's pulling away and becoming distant. And I know, oh no, we're going to come head to head with this. And we would. And it was really hard. And we got in this cycle that didn't end until I was able to really convincingly tell him that I loved him. And he deals with me really well now. And so I think Paul we got into this position where he was doing the thing where he wanted to be closer and closer and closer, which made me want to be further and further away. And once he got a really distinct sign that, oh no, she loves me. We've been together 9 months. She was able to say it. She's introduced me to her friends and family. He started looking for all these objective clues that he kind of couldn't argue with. He was able to say, okay, I can let her have the anxiety that she has and take the space she needs. He's letting me come to him now. And that takes off a whole lot of pressure from the relationship. And we're doing a lot better.
So, I mean, from all these stories, what it seems like is, let's say you have a relationship where one person's anxiously attached and one is avoidantly attached. And it could feel like one person's chasing and the other one is like the one being chased, right? Because one's avoiding and one's like, please reassure me. And it seems like in order to break that chase cycle, the person who is avoidantly attached needs to really sincerely demonstrate that they care and express it in the way that anxiously attached person can hear it. And at the same time, ask for the space, ask for the other parts of life they need outside of the relationship, in a way that's like, I care about you, and also I need this space.
Yeah.
And the people who are anxiously attached really can like do their best to like listen and hear for signs that person cares, right? It's going to fall on deaf ears if they like keep ignoring it. So it's just like, oh yeah, that person does care about me because this is how they show it. But at the same time, like, have some acceptance. Have an acceptance of like, okay, let me just try trusting and just saying, okay, that person needs their space. They need their other friends. That doesn't mean that this relationship is over. So just like give a little breathing room. Easier said than done, but that's what these stories sound like to me.
Yeah, I think we can kind of go into sort of skills that will help kind of diffuse these situations. And I mean, the first thing I would say is, I think a lot of people, they look for signs that their partner loves them, but they look for signs for their own perspective instead of looking at like, how does my partner express love? Paul was looking for me to do things like clean the house to express my love, which is just, I mean, if you look for that sign, like you're going to think that I hate you. So he had to look at things like, she introduced me to her entire family. Everyone knows Jacqueline's obsessed with her family. Like this must have been sort of a big thing for her. Everyone knows Jacqueline's terrified of commitment, and yet she's living in my house. We've gotten 2 animals together. We've been together for 9 months. So you just kind of have to look for different things other than maybe he was initially looking for. Why doesn't she tell me she loves me ever? Why isn't she as physically affectionate all the time? Just sort of ways that he would normally give love he was looking for. But that doesn't really work because everybody expresses love differently. So we want to talk about some tips from this book called The High Conflict Couple. And these are, again, we'll talk about this all the time, but dialectical behavioral kind of approaches to couple conflict. And there are just a couple we'll touch upon now, but they're really helpful for dealing with the situations when conflict arises. And when we're in this tight of a space together, or when we're separated and we're in this like chronic long distance situation during COVID, there's going to be conflict. So the first thing I want to say is whether you are anxious or avoidant or secure or whatever, it doesn't mean that there's something like wrong with you. It doesn't mean that your needs aren't valid. And I think that a lot of people get into that headspace, particularly probably anxiously attached people, where they're like, I want him home. I want him home. What is he doing? What is he doing? I can't like, why am I like this? Why can't I trust him? Why can't I chill? But it's totally fine to want your partner closer. And it's totally fine to be curious about where they are and to feel a little bit worried. And so what often happens is they get themselves into this bad cycle of like, what's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. No, it's because they're doing this to me. I don't want to be mad at myself, so I'll be mad at them. And then when we feel shame, that can be quickly externalized because it's a really painful feeling. Maybe the most painful feeling, to feel like there's something defective about me. There's something wrong with me and I don't want to look at it. I just want to escape. So what if I make it about someone else? What if I make it about the person who's making me feel this way? And then that can turn really quickly into anger. So one really quick way to stop this cycle before it starts is to tell yourself, my feelings are kind of valid and it's okay to feel this way. And I can describe this to my partner in a way that doesn't have to blame him for anything. It doesn't have to include anger, unless you think it should. There are going to be times where anger is very appropriate. But you can do this by really describing from your perspective how you're feeling and not using judging language, but using descriptive language. So instead of, how could you not come home earlier? Why didn't you call? I can't trust you. It's looking at what did you really need in that moment and really want.
Yeah, and I think that kind of what we learn in couples therapy is that it really helps to turn that like, what did I need? What did I really want? Into a specific kind of concrete thing to ask for, right? Instead of just like, I need you to care for me more. It's like, I would really love it if you just told me that you love me or that you care about me a little bit more, or very specific actually. So like, I don't know, tell it to me now, or, bring me dinner 2 nights a week. Right? Like it's easier to actually ask the other person for like concrete things that they can do. Yeah.
And that's going to bring their anxiety down also, because the worst part sometimes is like you're trying to guess what the other person wants and you just can't get it right. Paul and I got in this a lot, Paul would get stony silent for a few days and then it would all kind of come out in this explosion. And I'm like, God, what did I do? And we got really good at, he names it right when it happens, right when he's feeling me pull away, right when he's feeling insecure, he names it. That didn't make me upset. It was a relief to be like, oh, I can address it now.
For me, it was like, I need a night to myself. Like I needed to ask for space. And what that really meant, not just like, I need space, get out of my face, but like, I need a night by myself. I need a evening, like doing a social distance hang with Jacqueline instead of hanging out together. So yeah, so for the avoidant attached people, sometimes it could be like, ways to get space for yourself.
Yeah. And how much different does it sound to say, hey, I'm feeling really kind of cooped up in quarantine and I feel like for myself, I need a night with my girlfriends to, reconnect with people that I really care about. Would it be okay if I took, Thursday night and, had a Zoom date with them? Versus, oh my God, I'm going crazy. You won't leave me alone. Like, please, I need to get out. Like, just go away. You know what I mean? Like, it just sounds...
I probably have sounded like that at some point. Yep, I tried both of those. Yeah, the first one works way better.
First one works better. Yeah, okay. Which brings us into skill number 2, having this conversation during periods when you are not emotionally amped up.
Yeah, there's John Gottman is like a really famous couples researcher. Said that like so many problems with relationships can be fixed with just like couples like taking a break, cooling off, and talking when they're more calm. And whatever that means to you, like if that means that in the conversation you notice that your blood is starting to boil, you could just say, I need 15 minutes. I need 15 minutes, and just go and do something that helps you calm down and then come back together when you're feeling more calm. Whenever someone asks their partner for space, it's always a good idea to be very specific about that space, how long it's going to be, what you're going to do, when you're going to come back and talk. It's one thing to be like, I'm out of here, I just need to get out, and you leave the house and the person doesn't know what's happening. But it's way more collaborative and effective to be like, I need like 2 hours. I need to like go and do my own thing for 2 hours. I'm just going to go watch a movie, right? That feels a lot different because then it's like, then the other person's in on it. They know that in 2 hours we're going to come back together. So it makes it way more of like a partnership, right? So more of like working with a team to be like, hey, we need to cool off for a day. There was a couples workshop, a training that I went to that they recommend for couples if they're really in a cycle of getting into a lot of different fights and getting heated when they talk, to even have a language for it, to say like, okay, from 0 is super calm to 100 is like I'm screaming on the top of my lungs, right? From this range of 0 to 100. They can only talk if they're feeling a 70 or under. So when they're starting to feel like a 70 or above, they're like, hey, I need to take 15 minutes. And they go and down-regulate their emotions, like do something calming for themselves.
So I'd say the last general tip is validation.
Yeah.
This book actually I love it when we see these, like, makes it this clear. So the rule of 3, that if you can validate your partner 3 consecutive times, then they are likely to bring down their emotional arousal and be able to have a real conversation with you. And a really annoying thing to tell someone when they are upset is you need to validate the person who upset you. But it's actually very useful, and it actually kind of leads to self-respect, because basically what you're doing is you're telling yourself that you're going to stay in control. Because the other person, I mean, they may be pissing you off royally, but there's also some validity to their feelings. It might not be valid that it was like your fault or that you did something wrong, but there's something valid going on with how they're feeling. And if you can kind of connect to that and stay centered around, I care about this person, I love this person, I want them to feel heard and understood, and so I'm going to demonstrate that so that we can move forward through a conversation that's effective and isn't just going to like amp up into, we're screaming at each other and like screaming past each other. Then you're actually staying in control, and you're staying more aligned presumably with your own values.
Yeah, and I think that, so when we say validation, we mean treating the other person's emotions and other internal experiences as valid, as real. So not dismissing it, but being like, yes, I understand that you're feeling upset. I get that you're feeling upset, right? So acknowledging it. I think the key principle here is that when you're talking to your partner about the things that you need, whether you're anxiously or avoidantly attached, is to look at you guys as a team. Like approach the conversation like you're team members. Like how you like, especially if you're like really good at work and good at like talking to your team. It's like, how would you approach that situation? You would come into it saying like, okay, I'm going to try to understand your perspective and your thoughts and feelings, and they're legitimate and a really big part, and so are mine. And how do we get like my needs met and your needs met in a way that makes sense for both of us, right? So it's almost kind of like approaching it like a team and a partnership is going to be way more effective than like, I'm going to fight against this person. Yeah.
So there are a lot of skills, especially from the High Conflict Couple book. I think it's actually, if you are in a relationship where you're fighting a lot, this is a fantastic book to buy. But I'd say briefly, if this is an attachment style difference, kind of remember to give yourself credit. Your experience is valid. It makes sense, especially probably in context with your past experiences. So really kind of give yourself that self-validation that it's okay that I feel this way. I deserve this to feel this way. And my partner does too. And we have different needs, and it doesn't mean that we don't love each other, but there might be just a conflict because we're two different people who need different kinds of space or closeness. Approach conflicts when you are in a state of low emotional arousal. Try to describe your experience accurately, so don't overstate it because you feel like your experience isn't valid, so you need to make it sound more important than it is. It's already important. Don't understate it because you feel like they won't listen. State it accurately. Describe it non-judgmentally. So just kind of stick with your own feelings, your own needs, give really specific asks. Take space when you need to in an argument, but kind of put parameters around that, how long it's going to be, why you're doing it, and start conversations with validation, both for yourself and for your partner. And Dad?
Yeah, and say that, like, as we were saying before, like, we're learning about all this stuff. We're learning from our own experiences, as well as like trying to read and listen and learn in our studies. And the one thing I really also want to point out is that it is a very different, like, all the tips that we're giving, it doesn't apply as well to situations where one or both parties in the relationship are afraid for their safety or their life. So in any situation where there's a risk of physical abuse or even really bad emotional, psychological abuse, or people are afraid for, to be in the house with somebody, all of these communication tips that we're giving really applies best to when there's like an equal standing with two people, and any kind of abuse or violence like that, or even threat of so, changes that dynamic, right? It creates a power differential where that needs to be addressed. So if there's any sort of abuse or violence, that needs to be the thing that's worked on immediately. But if you think that, that this applies to your relationship, if you're afraid for yourself or your physical safety is at risk at all, or your children, call the National Domestic Abuse Hotline. That's 1-800-799-7233. We'll also put it on the website. But if you think that you're in an abusive situation or you're scared for your own safety, I would reach out to help. I wouldn't necessarily just like sit down and validate and have a calm conversation. Like, your safety is a priority. So.
Absolutely. So I want to say thank you to all of my followers who sent me their stories and told me a little bit about what's been going on with them and their relationships. And we hope you listen next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.